Today is the 21st of September 2012. We are in Troy, New York at the Troy Senior Center. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm from the New York State Military Museum. Ma'am, for the record, would you please state your full name, please, and where you were born?
My full name is Helen Marcil Brennan. I was born in Cohoes, New York.
Now, did you attend school in Cohoes?
Grammar school. I went to St. Bernard's Grammar School, and for high school I went to Catholic High in Troy.
All right. And do you recall where you were when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor? That was December of '41?
Yes, very vividly I remember.
Okay.
It was on a Sunday,
Yep.
December 7th, and we were getting ready for dinner,
Yep.
and my family, and we heard it on the radio, and my mother started to cry very softly, and I thought, gee, why is she crying, you know? But she was thinking she had two sons, and she figured they'll be going into the service. So that's when I heard it.
Okay.
And then years later, I visited in Hawaii. I visited where the
Oh yes, the Arizona.
Pearl Harbor, the Arizona, and what a feeling to know that all those bodies were down there.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience to go there.
Now, after you heard about the attack at Pearl Harbor, did life change much for you at that point?
Well, at that time I was in the FBI, and my brother immediately and my boyfriend, they went down the next day and volunteered to enter the service. My boyfriend, who later became my husband, joined the Navy, and my brother joined the Coast Guard.
Now, when you were with the FBI during that period, did business kind of pick up with them because of the war being on?
Yes, it did, yes. In fact, I had a hard time getting a release
I see.
To go into the service because they said I was doing my duty there. But I said I really wanted to go, and I still have a letter from J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, do you really?
Giving me permission to resign and saying he hoped I'd have a good time in the service.
Now, can you tell us about what type of work you were doing?
In the FBI?
Yes.
I can just say that I was in correspondence. I ran the switchboard, and I did teletypes and all sorts of communication, but we couldn't talk about it.
I see. Okay. All right. So you decided to go into the Coast Guard, the SPARS.
Because my brother was in the Coast Guard.
Okay.
That's how I decided. And one day, I was on my lunch hour and from the FBI, and there was a recruiting trailer on North Pearl Street. And I went over, and it was for the SPARS. And so I got all the information, and when I went home, I was all enthused about going into the service.
How did your parents feel about it?
Well, my mother and father at first, my father was very old-fashioned, and he had an idea that all service women were fast, as he used to say. And I said, Dad, they aren't, but finally, he didn't want me to go in, but he didn't stop me. But then after I was in, and he was very proud of me and my sister and my two brothers.
Now, was your father a veteran himself?
Yes, he was in World War I.
Was he in the Navy or the Army?
He was in the Army.
I see. All right. So you went into the Coast Guard. Now, you mentioned your sister going in also.
Yeah, right, yes. She went in a year after I did.
Okay.
Because she had to wait for her to age, be old enough to go in. And then I was way ahead of her in Yeoman School down in, and the funny part of it is, the day that I was sworn in Albany.
Now, do you recall when that was?
It was in, let's see, it was in August. I went in August.
Of 1942.
And I had to meet a group of people in New York City, and I had 2 suitcases, and I thought I'll never make it. Instead of carrying 1, I had 2. So we had to. So I went all by myself to New York City, and I was just about dying, holding my 2 suitcases.
Now, did you go down by train?
Pardon, by train.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. And then I met the people at Grand Central Station, and we boarded a military. We had to wait, and we had a military train.
Oh, I see.
And it took us forever to get to Palm Beach. And
was it like an overnight trip? I'm sure.
Yes, it was.
A couple days or 1 day?
It was 2 days.
2 days.
And for us to get down there. And when we got there to the recruiting or the station, the SPAR, they were billeted in the Biltmore Hotel. It had been a very swanky motel and was taken over by the government. And when we got in there for the first time, we got in line we were starving, and we went right to the dining mess hall. And when we got going through the mess hall, the girls that were dishing out potatoes and stuff, they all started to say, "You'll be sorry." And so that's when we got there for the first time. And then I went to Yeoman School.
Okay, let me just go back a little bit. Now, were you homesick at all? Was that the first time away from home?
It was my first time away from home. And when I went to New York City, it was my first time going there alone. So I was very sheltered, so to speak.
Now, what was basic training like?
Well, it was wonderful, really. The Biltmore Hotel in Palm Beach, we went to classes from 9 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, but it wasn't all the classes. During that time, we would have drill, we would march, learn how to march, and we would have swim and surf. We would go swimming. So it was broken up, the classroom study. So it was really a wonderful training, and I did graduate first in my class.
Oh, did you?
From the Yeoman School. Okay. Yes, I did.
Now, you say Yeoman School, was that what the basic training was called?
No, the basic training was, I forget how long we were in basic training, but then we graduated. Okay. Had a big picture taken of the whole group. Then we were interviewed to see what school we wanted to go to, or what they decided.
Now, when they found out that you were with the FBI, I mean, you probably had your choice of wherever you wanted to go, didn't you?
Well, I had the choice of going. I could have gone to New Orleans or out of St. Louis, the headquarters, but I picked St. Louis, and then from St. Louis, because I was a recruiter and I was a good speaker, I used to speak at every town that I went to, I would go to the Rotary Club and I would talk there. And I had 2 speeches always. One, I look at the crowd, and one would be very low key, and if I thought it should be higher, I would talk more about the casualties in all of war, but not always. And I had one problem that bothered me for years after I got out of service. When I was up in North Dakota, I was recruiting 18-year-old boys. And a young man came in and I interviewed him, and he was so thrilled to go into the service. And I did all his exam and all that. And then he he went down, and then he would go into Omaha to be sworn in. So, but it was all through me that he came in. And I went to, and he asked me when I was up there, he said, would you like to come to Sunday dinner with my family, and being always eating in restaurants and hotels and all that. I was thrilled, and I went and I met on Sunday afternoon, met his mother and father, and they told me how thrilled he was that he was going into the service, that he was on cloud 9. Well, about 6 months later, he was shipped out, and he was on a ship that was torpedoed, and he was killed. Oh. And I felt responsible for that. I really did, because I thought if I hadn't recruited him, maybe he wouldn't have gone in the Coast Guard. And I really, it troubled me a lot. So the next time that I had to go up there to recruit in North Dakota, I thought, I can't. His parents, they probably kicked me right up their porch. But I thought, I have to do it. I have to do it. So I called them up, and I told them I was in town to recruit again, and they invited me to dinner. Oh. So I went over, and I told them how sorry I was. I said, I can't get him out. They gave me a big picture of him, too. I said, I can't get him out of my mind. I said, because I feel responsible that he's dead. And they said, I don't feel like that. It was the most wonderful thing that happened to him. He was so happy. And so instead of them saying to me, you our son, and he's dead, they were open arms for me, and I was so, I had such a feeling of gratitude that they did that. But that's the only bad memory that I have from the service. And
now that school, your Yeoman School, do you recall how long that school was?
It was, let's see, from September to February.
Okay. And that included clerical plus recruiting?
Yes.
I see.
Plus recruiting and public speaking. And
so you were basically a natural at that public speaking, so.
Yeah. I guess I was, right.
Now you also mentioned your sister. She was part of the recruiting?
She was. She came, so it was really a very a good advertisement for the spars that two sisters were there. So they took advantage of that and let us both be at the same station, be stationed together. But I was in travel status, and I went all over and did the speeches and that. My sister was in yeoman work. She did all clerical work in the office. She didn't do the traveling. I did it.
Now, did you travel by yourself, or was there an officer?
Well, a lot of times I had to travel. When it was small, very small towns in North and South Dakota, I would go by myself. And on the train, and I'd be. I remember the one small town that I went to, and I said, "Why did they ever send me here?" When I got off the train, I went over and I had my suitcase, and I had all sorts of pamphlets and the posters and a lot of stuff. And I said, where can I get a taxi? And the man said to me, we don't have any taxis. And he said, where are you going? And I told him the hotel. So he said, oh, it's about 3 blocks down. He told me how to get there. So I walked there. And when I went in, it was like something out of Norman Rockwell. There were 4 men, and they were sitting around a pot-belly stove. And when I come in the door, they all turned around and looked at me. And one man stood up and he said, you must be the recruiter that's coming, because they had sent my reservations, and they didn't have to, because I was the only one in the hotel. Oh. And so he brought me up. There was no elevator. He brought me up to the 2nd floor, and I asked him for my key, and he said, well, we don't usually use keys. And I said, well, I've got to have a key, you know. So it was a skeleton key, you know, that's the type of a, but I spent a whole week there by myself. I recruited out of the post office. But then when I'd get out of there and go look for a place, there was no restaurant. I went to a bakery and bought food there, and went and bought milk.
Oh my gosh.
So then I called up my recruiting office in Omaha and I said, do I have to stay a whole week here? I'm not interviewing anyone, and you can't imagine the little town it was. I guess that was an error that we picked that place. And of course I didn't interview anyone. And of course I didn't have any speeches because there was no Rotary or anything like that.
You just had the guys around the potbelly stove, right?
Yes, right. But but then another thing when out of St. Louis they had the special, all of the men that were in all the bands, Glen Miller and all that, they had a group that went all around the country, like they do now, how they come to different towns. So when they came into Omaha and came into our office, and they said that they were going to be in the area, and they were going to go to North and South Dakota, and they wanted to take a recruiter with them because they figured the band was there, they would put on this wonderful concert in a town, and then the recruiter would be there, maybe getting some people into the service. So they picked me and said that I would go. So I went, I rode in the bus with all of the musicians, and we went to one, I remember we were up in, I was never so cold in my life. We were in Fargo, North Dakota, and it was so cold, unbelievably cold, and we put on a concert, and as we were coming out of the stage door, there were a lot of grammar school kids there with their autograph books, and one little girl came over to me and she said, "Are you anybody?" And I said, "No, I'm really not." I said, "But these men, they were in the Glen Miller and all the different bands and all, but she was so cute, are you anybody?" So I used to say that, use that as my, wherever I went, you know, to people, they'd say, "Are you anybody?" "No, I'm not," you know. So I enjoyed that, and so I traveled with them through Iowa, North and South Dakota while they did their concerts, and I sat on the stage. And I do not have any musical talents, but the man that was in charge of them, he said they had one number and they were going to do it, and they had those maracas, you know.
Oh yeah.
And he said to me, "Helen, I want you to, when I do this, I want you to run the," and I said, "Really, I don't have any rhythm." I said, "I'm not going to be able to do it. You'll do it." So I said, "Okay." So he told me one or two times to do it. So then when it came to that part, that he went like that to me, and I threw the whole band off. I did it all wrong, and I was so embarrassed. And I said to him, "I told you I couldn't do it." So he never asked me to do it again. And he said, "Stick to your speeches." And I said, "I told you, I'm not musically inclined." But when recruiting closed, we closed our recruiting station in Omaha, and we had our choice of 3 places to go. We could go to Alaska, Hawaii, or Washington. I picked Washington because my husband. In the meantime, my husband had come home, and we were married in Omaha, Nebraska. I was engaged to him from.
Now, what was he in?
He was in the Navy. He was the radio man, and he was on a sub chaser, and he was on the same sub chaser for 4 years. So let's see, what was I just saying about the...
Being stationed, you picked Washington, you said
Oh,
you
yeah,
got
so
married.
I picked Washington because I had gotten a letter from my husband that he was in the South Pacific the whole through war, but he was going to be discharged and he was on Guam, and he said, I'll be coming back. So I thought I wanted to go to Hawaii, but I said I better go to Washington. He'll come home in the meantime. But he was out in Guam when I was discharged and other people were. So I really could have gone to Hawaii, but I wouldn't do that, thinking maybe I'd miss seeing him. And one other very nice thing happened to my sister and me. I was fortunately, I wasn't on the road, and I was in Omaha at the recruiting office, and what do they call it? A military policeman came in, and he said, where are the Marcil sisters? And we both looked up, and we said, here we are. And he said, your brother Jack is on a troop train here in Omaha. We have a delay, and he said that his sisters were here, and we want to bring you down to see your brother. Wasn't that nice?
Oh, wow.
So they brought us down, and there was this troop ship, all military, you know, and they walked us down, and they let my brother get off the train, but we had to stay right there,
right on the platform.
But we hadn't seen my brother in almost 3 years. And so when he said how that happened, he had been in Germany and all that part of the service, and he was just ready to come home, and they needed an electrician first class, and they sent him right out to the West Coast so that he would go into the South Pacific. So he was telling them, they were stopped at Omaha.
So he was in the Navy too?
He was in a Coast Guard.
A Coast Guard, yep.
And he was on an LSD landing.
Ship tank, yep.
And so he mentioned, my sisters are stationed here. So the officer that was in charge, he said, started to talk to Jack, and he said, we're going to be here for a couple of hours. We'll go and get your sisters. So I thought that was so nice, you know, that they brought us down and we got to see Jack. We hadn't seen him in 3 years. But we, right down there at the tracks, we had to stay.
And I take it he made it home all right?
Yes, he did. Thank God he did. And my sister's dead, and my brother that was in the Navy, the youngest one, he was a pharmacist mate, but he was attached to the Marine Corps. He's dead, and my sister's dead, but my brother Jack, the one I'm talking about, he and I are the only two that are still living.
Okay. Whereabouts does he live?
Pardon?
Whereabouts does he live?
He lives in Albany, in Westmere.
Okay.
And
do you think he might want to be interviewed?
yeah, I was just thinking maybe you'd want.
All right, I'll give you one of those brochures and
I'll give it to. I'll call him.
Yep, and all he has to do is fill it out and mail it to me.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Okay.
Because he had a lot of service things that he was in, you know, landing. They would land the troops and all. And so, yeah, I'll give that to Jack.
Okay. Now, you mentioned being discharged. Did you have any choice? I mean, did you want to stay in the service, or they just decided?
No, how I happened to get out. I said how my husband was on Guam waiting to be discharged. And then I was down in Washington, you know, when recruiting closed, and I was in Washington. Had a good job there and enjoyed Washington. And one morning I was called, and it was in the middle of the night, and they said, your husband is calling from Seattle, Washington. So I spoke to him, and well, I cried through most of the phone call, and he said, Helen, please let me talk to you, stop crying. And so he came to Washington. and he had to show his he was discharged from Seattle, Washington, and he showed his discharge. And if your husband was discharged, you automatically could be discharged.
Oh, I see.
So all I had to do was produce his discharge, and I was discharged too.
Now, your sister, was she single or was she married too?
She was single, and she was in for another 7 months.
Okay.
And she finally had gone to Washington too.
Okay.
And she was in Washington.
Now, do you remember where you were when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
Yes.
What was that like?
I was in Omaha, and I was going up the stairs into the USO.
Mm-hmm.
And two of the Army recruiters, two of the women that were, you knew most of the recruiters of the other services because we would attend different meetings together. And they were coming down and they said, Helen, guess what? And they told me. That's where I was, in the middle of the flight of stairs up to the USO when I heard he was dead. And then another thing that was very emotional for me. Remember General Wainwright? And how he was in that death march, and he was all, well, they had in Washington, when I was in Washington, he came into Washington and they had a special parade in his honor. He was in an open car, and we had to line the streets, all of the military, different military, and as his car passed where you were standing, you would salute him. And he looked like he was coming back from the grave. He was so thin, you know. But I always remembered that. That was a highlight in my life, too, that I was there when he was in Washington.
Now, when the war finally ended with the dropping of the atomic bombs and the surrender of Japan, was there a lot of celebration that you can recall?
Not really. I guess there was in New York City and all that, but there wasn't in Washington where we were. There wasn't. We just knew, oh, the war is over, you know, and but nothing dramatic that I remember about that. And then when I was in a boot camp, when I first went in, we were there for 6 weeks in boot camp, and we all got different jobs. Some got a job in mess hall, and I got a job the painting silver, the trays, those great big racks that they would bring in. And I made the mistake of saying there was a quartermaster that was in charge, and he said, you do this painting. And I said, oh, I don't know how to paint. He said, you'll learn, you know. So that's what I did in boot camp. I painted all those racks, the individual spokes that were on the racks. But I never regretted my service. I think I had, well, I was very patriotic. My whole family was patriotic. And because I remember my mother and father, I mentioned the 4 stars in the window. They were so proud of that, you know. And the people next door to us had 3 children in the service, and they had 3 stars. And then when my youngest brother, Ned, the one that was in the Navy, when he went in and we got the 4th star, my father and mother were thrilled, you know. And so, yeah, they were days of loneliness, you know.
Sure.
You said, did I ever get homesick? When I was in Florida and I was in Yeoman School, and I was studying and studying, sitting there studying, and then all of a sudden I started to cry, and I couldn't stop crying. I just had that one session of unbelievable homesickness, but then it left. But I treasure the years that I was in the service.
Now, when you were discharged, did you make use of the GI Bill at all?
Yes, we did. My husband and I, oh no, not for education, but for buying a home.
Okay.
We did that.
Okay.
But we didn't not for education.
Now, when you got back, did you have the option of going back to the FBI, or?
Yes, but by that time I was pregnant.
I see.
And I thought, I never went back.
Okay. Now, did you stay in contact with anyone you were in the service with?
I did for several years, and then there were girls that were in recruiting with me, but then suddenly we lost contact of each other. I don't know why, but no, I didn't have anyone. Just I met that Antoinette.
Yep.
Yeah, and she went in much later than me, so she didn't have the option of deciding what she wanted to be, and she worked in the galley, I think. And another one, Monica Amiot, was with her, and she graduated from school with me. And one time I came home on leave, and she came to see me, and she said, "Oh, can I try on your uniform?" And I said, yes. She tried it on, and then she joined the Spars. But that was at the end, almost the end of recruiting.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have an option to go to any kind of a trade school or anything. They just had to go to Boston. She went to Boston too.
Okay. Did you, well, of course, I was going to ask you if you made any use of that, what they call the 5220 Club. Did you ever?
You know, I always, I was entitled to it, and I never, my father said, you don't have to apply for that, you don't have to do that. And my husband got a job right away, earning, after the war, he was getting $16 a week, and I wasn't getting anything because I became pregnant almost right away. I was home. But we never ever filed for that. And after years later, some people said to me, you were stupid that you didn't file for that. For a whole year of that. And I was entitled to it, but I never filed for it. No.
Okay.
Never did.
How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life? Obviously, it was a positive experience for you.
How it changed my life? Well, it broadened me about meeting so many different types of people, from different parts of the country. And I never had any negative other than when that young man was killed. It just enriched my life going into the service, because if I hadn't gone into the service, I would have been living in Troy, working at the FBI in Albany, and that would have been it, But I got to go all over the Middle West. I went all over, and I enjoyed all the people I met. I really had a wonderful time in the service.
Did you join any veterans organizations like the American Legion or
No.
anything like that? Okay.
No, I never did.
All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Other than I have no regrets about going into the service, even though I was making more money in the FBI than when I went in the service. But I was doing what I wanted to do, and I was very happy.
Well, thank you so much for your interview.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you.